Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I am so excited to talk about today from the Donna Adelsson trial. My favorite witness in all of the Adelson saga took the stand today against Donna Adelsson, and that would be the one and only Mr. Jeffrey Lacasse. He basically is the person who blew this case wide open. Not only did he meticulously go over the weeks to month or so before the murder took place and found the most incriminating information about the Adelson family. But he also was, by all accounts, what appears to be the fall guy for this entire murder for hire plot. His testimony in every trial has been, bar none, the most important testimony, in my opinion, out of anyone who has taken the stand. And today, again, was extremely important. That did not come without its challenges. The prosecution actually made a very big mistake today, but because the defense team seems to be somewhat asleep at the wheel, they just glossed over it without fighting very hard at all. So with that, let's get through our review of the day 3 in Donna Adelsson's trial. Here we have the witness list, starting off with the 2 significant others of the Adelson siblings, Jeffrey Lacasse and Jane Muchinda. You'll actually see a 3rd significant other of the Adelson siblings, which happens to be Catherine Magbanua, who was a girlfriend-ish of Charlie as well. Charlie seemed to have many different women in and out of his life. Wendy also seemed to have multiple men in her life at one time, but potentially was stringing our first witness, Jeffrey Lacasse, along in their relationship by ways of saying things like, don't buy that car. It's not good for kids. Oh, don't buy a home. Obviously, we're building a future together. So Jeffrey Lacasse seemed to be getting, kind of kicked down the road with this hope of being in Wendy and her children's life, all the while finding out that Wendy Adelson was connecting with other men while they were in this relationship. As we come to learn more information about what happens between Jeff and Wendy, it will become extremely suspect and show that Wendy does have a high degree of participation potentially in this murder for hire. We went through some very boring but very important information as well. A lot of times forensics, when it has to do with data and information, not interesting things, can cause the eyes of the jury and the people in the courtroom to glaze over. But the forensic accountant, who is an expert, and the communication records expert were both very important in showing that Donna Adelsson had a hand in this murder for hire. Because as we've seen, there is a bit of a focus on Wendy, and I have seen people push back or wonder in the online, talk about this case, why they're focusing on Wendy so much. And I believe we can hash that out. We can't forget that the case against the Adelsons does not have a lot of direct evidence. We don't have DNA tying them to a crime scene. We don't have gunpowder residue on the hands. We don't have them in the vicinity of the murder. What we have is a bunch of breadcrumbs that, when added up, have a trail that leads directly from the Adelsons to the middleman, to the hitmen, to Dan Markel being murdered. And the very suspicious behavior after the murder of Dan Markel also adds to the circumstantial case that ultimately becomes a mountain of evidence against each one of the Adelsons being put on trial. Eventually, Wendy, by everyone's guess. It does seem to shock the senses a little bit watching this case, seeing how much evidence there truly is against Wendy Adelson, and wondering why she has not been arrested yet. Many people are waiting for it, and at this current time, it feels as though the state has had enough practice with the quote unquote easier cases. And when I say easier, that would be because Wendy herself, despite being rather dumb, in my opinion, in many ways, is an attorney and may have tried to craft in certain reasonable doubt or defenses in her actions regarding the murder for hire, allegedly. So, if the state is waiting for the perfect time to get Wendy, having Wendy be heavily focused on in this case does bring us a few steps closer, in my opinion, to potentially seeing Wendy in cuffs. And a few explosive moments have come out in this case regarding Wendy, not just Donna Adelson's attorneys basically throwing Wendy under the bus, but also Luis Rivera straight up testifying that it is Wendy. He implicated her twice, I believe. So when it comes to the reason why Wendy is the focus, it's because what motive does Donna have to kill Dan Markel other than for Wendy? And when you start adding up the little pieces of evidence that have come through that seem to be focused on Wendy, but go to show how Wendy, Donna, and Charlie are constantly talking about the divorce and custody battle that Wendy is going through with Dan, constantly trying to find ways to mess with Dan and get back at him or convince him in ways that aren't within the legal system, such as dressing the children up, trying to threaten by not calling it a threat, to have the kids go to Baptist church when Dan Markel is a devout Jewish man. And all of these things just go to show that Donna has the type of personality that may not be opposed to getting Dan Markel out of the way in the most inhumane and vicious way possible. And that goes to be proven, I guess you could say, by all the things Donna says. Donna says some pretty mean and nasty things about Dan Markel. And Donna potentially said some of those negative things about Dan Markel in front of the boys during this horrible battle within the courts between Wendy and Dan Markel. Now, I'd like you to look here at a picture from a yearbook that I saw online today, and I thought this was extremely interesting for two reasons. Number one of the alleged statements by Donna Adelson to the boys that made its way back to Dan Markel, one of the disparaging statements that Donna made was that Dan Markel was trying to, quote, take her sunshines away. Which, as soon as I saw this yearbook photo, I said, oh my goodness, sunshine seems to be the exact terminology that is likely used by Donna. And the other odd thing that I noticed in this yearbook photo is that it says all our love, Mom, Dad, and Charlie. You know who's missing from that list? The brother that we just saw testify yesterday, who is apparently estranged from this portion of his family as an adult. He did have some forms of conversation and communication with them, but he was clearly not close to his parents in the way Wendy and Charlie are. So I thought this was extremely telling, that rather than putting all our love, Mom, Dad, and the brothers, or anything, listing both brothers by name, however you want to do it, only Charlie is listed. And Wendy admittedly says she's much closer to Charlie. But does that discount the existence of the other brother in something as clearly special to this family as getting a whole page in a yearbook to memorialize? The brother is not even included, and this is a long time ago. And so it just goes to show that the state is focusing on Wendy, despite it being Donna's trial, for a reason. You must use Wendy to show the motive that Donna would have to do something like this. They can show how much communication, how much vitriol, and how obsessed the Adelson family was with Wendy's life in Tallahassee and helping her escape by any means necessary. Donna Adelson does not need more than the couple of pieces of overwhelming evidence that directly tie Donna into having known and participated in this murder for hire. Number one is her reaction to the bump. As soon as Donna Adelson is approached and essentially blackmailed by the undercover officer posing to be on behalf of one of the hired hitmen wanting more money, Donna Adelson does not have a very proper response that could make someone think she's not guilty. In fact, she immediately calls Charlie, brings up the code word TV, and says exactly how much it's going to cost for them to settle this debt. That does not sound like someone who does not have something to hide from the police, because you would think this innocent, sweet old lady of her age, retired, just wanting to hang out with her grandkids, would be scared out of her mind, being threatened by a gang member over nothing that they did, out of nowhere, out of the blue, especially over a murder you have nothing to do with potentially. Being blackmailed, just like Charlie said, if it came down to the Adelsons versus the people who were from the wrong side of the tracks saying that one was more guilty than the other, or that one is guilty and the other is not, Charlie even believed that he could, quote unquote, shoot someone dead. And when they see that it's a dentist there, he thought he could just get away with it because of his status in our society. And so Donna Adelson, being someone from the sheltered, privileged life, not being extremely off-put by having some kind of serious criminal activity be thrust upon her via this bump, is extremely damning. The TV mention is extremely damning. It is clearly the code word for this to have happened, and that is solidified again by our main man, Jeff Lacasse. We can kind of circle back to just how amazing he is, how strong his testimony always is, and just highlight how great his investigation skills are in the face of looking into the death of someone he was told for however long he'd been with Wendy and around the Adelson family was a horrible person. This is someone who was being brainwashed into believing that Dan Markel was evil, who came out of that and took the time to say, well, this person who I've been told was evil was murdered, and I'm still going to do my best to figure out what may have happened. So with that, we can get into just the hero of this story, other than the neighbor also, but Jeff Lacasse. In my opinion, without Jeff Lacasse, the people who have been brought to justice for the murder of Dan Markel and who may be continued to be brought to justice for the murder of Dan Markel may never have happened. He provided the most crucial, most important, and direct evidence that we could possibly have in this case. The ability for the state and the investigators to do what they did came from Jeff Lacasse. And what is so funny about his history with this is the first time he went to speak with the detectives, he felt the vibe, and the detective definitely really did sum him up as some kind of bitter ex, as someone who's just in there to try and pin it on Wendy for no reason. And maybe Jeff came off a little too manic. Maybe he seemed a little bit too hasty with his presentation of this evidence. But that detective just didn't get it. And it makes you wonder, like, how many times that kind of situation has happened in other cases where people who may not seem as credible or who may seem to have some kind of ulterior motive do have very pertinent and strong information to be giving to detectives, but the detectives do not take it seriously. And on the flip side, there's been a lot of criticism for Detective Isom in the case and his handling of Wendy Adelson, which in one of my previous videos of these recaps, I did say that I think Detective Isom did as best as he could with what they had at the time, and he did let Wendy, he got her there first and foremost as an attorney, which is a sign of guilt for Wendy, in my opinion, very heavily. But he not only got her to the interview room, but had her in there for hours and hours talking. And that is successful despite not probing potentially in the way that people may have wanted. And a good prosecutor can make do with what they have. And it turns out Detective Isom is the one who actually took Jeff Lacasse serious when he came in and said, I have a lot of information. It's probably going to sound crazy. I'm going to probably look like a crazy person with all the strings on a board. But if you hear me out, this is credible. And despite Jeff Lacasse getting excited and maybe a little bit too quick and jumping around in his explanations with Detective Isom did take it very seriously and did take notes, walked it back where he needed, was getting the pertinent information, and believed Jeff Lacasse. And I can't imagine what would have happened if he was disregarded a second time with the amount of information he had. Now, today, against Donna, of course, like we said, it's a windy day. Wendy was the main focus mostly of Jeff Lacasse's testimony. And when he was cross-examined, the holes, even though very weakly, that the defense attorney poked was that you really never talked to Donna, you don't know Donna, all this is coming from Wendy. And again, the defense is trying to throw, in my opinion, Wendy and anyone else they can about whichever fact comes up under the bus. And despite them not having a connection between Wendy or my apologies, Donna saying anything to Jeff Lacasse about a potential murder for hire, wanting to kill Dan, anything like that, it's still extremely relevant. Jeff Lacasse reiterates how and why this family had so many reasons to try and get Wendy away from Tallahassee, help with this battle that seemed to be never ending in the court system for them, which I would just like to point out that hopefully it won't be lost on the jury that the entire court battle that proceeded after the quote Pearl Harbor style divorce that Wendy did on Dan by deciding to pack up and leave and say that she's divorcing him as he's out of town on a business trip. All of this is happening because of her decision to, start this divorce process. And you'd think that at any point, Wendy could have just been happy being away from her marriage and no longer tied to Dan Markel romantically, that she would feel some sense of freedom or relief. But what we pick up is that is not enough. It's never enough. Not only did she want the divorce, but she wants the boys, and she wants the boys down in the southern part of Florida, the southern part of Florida, with her family. It's not enough just to be divorced and accept that, hey, I made this choice. I have these children now because of this marriage, and I love these children, and I want them to be in their father's life. I will stay in this town for the next 15 years until my boys are out of the time that they'd have to be under a custody arrangement, and I can go live my life happily ever after where I want to, but I'll make the best life possible for me, my boys, and the family we created, even though we've separated. That sentiment is nowhere to be found from anyone in the family, and I really hope that the jury just picks up on it. And Jeff Lacasse reiterates that, because he talks about how flippant and odd the behavior of this family is on multiple levels. Not only Charlie, but the celebration dinner and Wendy being somewhat of a dysfunctional person, all coming right after Wendy going up there and probably coming off as a very unbelievable witness, having zero credibility, in my opinion. Not only that, but she was followed up by her brother, who is estranged from the family, seems very believable and genuine. And just the fact, like the juxtaposition of those two is so strong for the jury. And so I really think that even though we're focusing on Wendy, it still shows that Donna had the motive through Wendy to get her sunshine back, just like we saw in the yearbook. The last thing I want to touch on very quickly is Katie McBanois. Her most important piece of testimony was about the money being wet. We've heard about the money being stapled, but the money being wet, because Katie McBanois directly implicates Donna Adelson as the one who washed the money, which, I mean, it just sounds so outlandish. They literally physically washed the money, likely to get any fingerprints or potential DNA, whatever, off of the money, which is just so crazy, the lengths that these people went to try and cover their tracks. And look at them now. Never met an actually smart criminal in my life. But when it comes to Katie McBanois, she actually may be one of the dumbest. And I'm sure that sounds a little bit harsh, but she messed up a complete immunity deal to snitch. She just said no. And now look at her on the stand in multiple trials, singing like a canary with no bargaining chips. Nothing's going to happen for you, Katie. You're not getting anything. What an idiot. She literally was offered complete immunity if she just did the right thing at that moment, helped the state in that moment. But no, she held out, and look at her now. Life in prison. And it is brought up by the state to get in front of it that she did have this immunity deal. Has anything been offered to you? Do you want anything because of this? And she said, yeah, I do want to see my kids. They did, basically say, that's not been promised to you though, right? She's like, no, which is extremely sad. But also, there are people who aren't getting to see their grandkids because of what has happened. And that is the grandparents of the Adelson children on the Markel side, Dan Markel's parents. There is a lot of people not seeing their kids anymore, or kids not seeing their father anymore. So no tears for me for Miss Katie McBanois, who decided to live a life of crime until getting caught and was delusional enough to, disregard immunity in order to end up in prison for life. Do I think that she is unbelievable for the jury because of her previous lies and her, things that potentially could be at stake for her in this, even though they really aren't? Maybe they discount her, but she was forthcoming with these facts. Her facts follow with other things that the jury is going to be hearing and have already heard. And so when it comes to the believability of Katie McBanois, I'm giving it at the very least 51% believable, 49% not believable. And it only goes up from there. So I do think that they are going to believe when Katie McBanois said that Donna Adelson washed the money. And it was reiterated twice in a subtle way, because Katie says the night that the money was exchanged and everything, when she got to Charlie's house, his parents had just left. Then we have the money being wet because of Donna. That literally puts their hands in this crime. Physically, literally, Donna washing the money. And it brings us back to grumpy old Harvey from out in the crowd being like, where was this wash? Did you see your wife washing thousands of dollars and not be like, what the hell is going on? How does someone wash thousands of dollars without their significant other seeing? How many bathrooms did they really have in that house? Like, what is going on here? I don't understand. But what I do know is dumb criminals do dumb things, right? And so that is the last piece of evidence that really came in my opinion, that is just overwhelming for Donna. Of course, the financial evidence goes to show that there were definitely checks being cut to Katie, who did not have a legitimate job at the Adelson Institute. But past that, maybe that could leave some reasonable doubt as to Charlie's girlfriends. It's not a great practice, but like we used to keep his girlfriends on the payroll and whatever. Washing money is extremely suspect. There's really no way to explain that. And I don't think Donna, via her defense, or if she does ultimately take the stand, will have a way to explain all of the little breadcrumbs that add up to her being guilty. Thank you so much if you've made it this far in this video. If you're interested in following cases like this or the Alexi Treviso case, which is going to oral argument September 4th, please subscribe as I'll be covering it all along the way with a legal focus. It's your Friday. I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.